Hello wine people, welcome to the video on sparkling wine production. This video is part of the Thirsty Wine Study and Support Program and is meant for wine people preparing for their WSET Level 3 wine course and exam. All sparkling wines are sparkling, but there's different styles and different methods that are used to make different styles of sparkling wines. So in this video I'll be explaining how the grapes for sparkling wines are treated in the vineyard, in the winery, and also 6 different methods how to make sparkling wine. So let's go. In the vineyard, the grapes for sparkling wines are treated differently than for still wines. The idea with sparkling wines is to have grapes that are sufficiently ripe, that have low levels of sugar that will translate into low sugar, low alcohol levels for the base wine, for the grapes to have high acidity, but in the same time to be sufficiently ripe. So that's the trick. So the best regions that can actually produce this kind of grapes are cool climate regions. So the grapes for the base wine, for sparkling wines, when the sugar is fermented, usually reach around 10 to 11% alcohol. This is very important because for many sparkling wines, there's second fermentation that additionally increases the alcohol level in the wine. So sparkling wines are always between 12.5% alcohol. The wine, so that's the trick. Having low sugar levels that are sufficiently ripe grapes that have high amounts of acidity that will bring the freshness to the wines. So in order to produce this kind of grapes, you need to have a cool climate that will allow slow ripening, that will enable grapes to ripen properly, but in the same time produce low sugar levels with ripe fruit and acidity. The other way is if the grapes are coming from a warmer climate, yes, you can pick early to have similar result, but you're sacrificing potentially grapes not being perfectly ripe because they didn't have enough time to ripen. Handling grapes and juice always needs to be done carefully to avoid oxidation, to avoid grapes breaking and contaminating the color of the juice, but that's additionally important in production of sparkling wines. So careful handling. In many cases, the grapes for sparkling wines are hand-picked. This is mandatory for champagne. In other regions, the grapes can be machine harvested. This is maybe even better for this kind of grapes not to get overripe, not to lose freshness and acidity. In champagne, the grapes are going to be hand harvested with whole bunches. The grapes need to be processed as soon as possible to avoid any oxidation. Very gently pressed, especially important for grapes that are black grapes, not to extract any color, because many of the wines that are produced in Champagne they're produced from black grapes, but they make white wines. And in the European Union, the extraction, the pressing of the grapes is highly regulated, and there's a certain levels of the pressure that can be applied and also the amount of juice that can be extracted for grapes for sparkling wines. There's 6 different methods to make sparkling wines: traditional, transfer, tank, ancestral, asti, and the cheapest one is carbonation. So let's go through each one of them. The most complex, the most expensive, the most labor intensive is the traditional method. Traditional method means that it has 2 fermentation and that the second fermentation is inside the bottle in which the wine is sold. So like I said, this is costly, time-consuming method. There's 7 steps. So for each step you need to know it and you need to understand to describe it and how it contributes to the final wine. So you have your base wine. The base wine can ferment in stainless steel, in oak, The wine can go through a malolactic conversion or not. This all will influence the style of final wine. And you can also add reserve wines. So that's actually the reserve wines are in the second step, where you're going to be blending your base wine with different grapes, potentially different winemaking techniques, different locations where the grapes are coming from. And you can also use reserve wines that are wines from different previous vintages in order to make your style of wine. These reserve wines you can use for consistency, where you're gonna make your house style, or you can use this reserve wine to add complexity. It all depends on what's the purpose. So blending is used for three purposes: consistency, balance, and complexity. So like I mentioned, consistency will be basically used for your house champagne, for champagne that always stays the same. So you have your blend that will make your decisions in the winery, that will make your house champagne taste always the same or very similar. Balance, blending different grape varieties that contribute different balance to the wine. So Chardonnay, it always gives more longevity to the wine, brings citrus and green fruit, where Pinot Noir, for example, brings more structure and body to the wine. Complexity, like I said, you can use complexity at making a more complex wine by adding reserve wine, to adding different base wine that is coming from different grapes, different locations, different winemaking techniques. So when you have your final blend, you're gonna use your base wine, you're gonna add it to a bottle, and to the bottle you're gonna add a liqueur de tirage. Liqueur de tirage is a blend of sugar, yeast, and clarifying agent. This liqueur de tirage will initiate the second fermentation. The wine will be closed by a temporary closure that is called crown cap, which is like an aluminum closure that has a plastic insert inside that is important later on for when the yeast will be extracted from the bottle. I'll explain. So this second fermentation will create the CO2 in the bottle. It will create the pressure that is from 5 to 6 atmospheric pressures, and it will create additional alcohol with around 1.3%. When the wine finishes the fermentation, the yeast that created the CO2 in the bottle will die, it will fall down, and it will start to break down. This process of breakdown of the yeast is called autolysis, and it is what it gives the characteristic flavor to traditional method sparkling wines that are made with this method. The flavors of brioche and bread and baked goods. The longer the wine stays in contact with the dead yeast cells, the more flavor it gets. This yeast autolysis can last for 4 or 5 years, and there's many cases that the wine ages on lees, and there's activity of yeast up to 10 years and much longer. When the yeast autolysis for your wine is done, when you decide, then the next step is riddling. Riddling is a process of positioning the yeast that is inside the bottle into the neck of the bottle for the purpose of removing the yeast from the bottle. This can be done in 2 ways. The traditional, very labor intensive and long and time consuming way is by hand, manually, where the bottles are positioned in something that is a rack that is called papeterie, and the bottle original position is horizontal. So each day a person will twist the bottle clockwise a little bit, until the bottle goes into inverted position, upside down, with the neck facing down, for the yeast to slide down in the neck of the bottle to be removed. And this can take up to eight weeks. A more efficient way to do it with the same results is with machines that are called gyro palettes. So these gyro palettes, they manipulate the wine. They can fit around 500 bottles in the same time, and the process can take only a few days with the same result. So when the yeast is in the position to be extracted, the next step is disgorgement and corking. So disgorgement is the process of removing the yeast. This process is usually in the big wineries, it's automated, where the neck of the bottle is put inside a very cold freezing solution that extract, and then the bottle is returned to original position. The yeast is removed, and some of the wine that gets lost through the process, it is replaced by liqueur d'expédition or dosage. So this liqueur d'expédition consists of wine. It can be a wine that is made in different methods. Maybe it can be a reserve wine or a wine that was aged in oak in order to make a more complex and richer style of wine. And also sugar is added if you have a sparkling wine that has different levels of sweetness. For sweetness, we'll explain it on the end of the video. And also this is a method that you can actually determine the color of the wine. Again, I'll explain that on the end of the video as well. So this liqueur d'expédition, dosage, it determines your final style of wine. And then after that, the bottle is ready for corking. You put the permanent cork, that is actually a very compressed cork, and then you put the cage on top of that actually, because of the pressure of the bottle and the compression of the cork, creates that mushroom shape that sparkling wines are known for. After you have your bottled and corked wine, most of the sparkling wines by a traditional method, they're ready at this point for consumption, but many wines actually can benefit from longer aging in the bottle to get even more complex. Also for the bottle aging, especially for wines, traditional method sparkling wines that are not vintage wines, it's very difficult to determine how old the wines are. So many producers, they put actually a disgorgement date that will give you an indication when the wine was disgorged and how old the wine is, which will determine how complex the wine is. So that was the most complex method, the traditional method. Transfer method, much easier. So transfer method is adaptation of traditional method without the costly and complex riddling and disgorgement. So the same process as the traditional method until the process of riddling. So second fermentation, you have your base wine, you have the second fermentation in the bottle, everything is the same, the process is all the same until riddling. But then instead of riddling the bottles and disgorging them one by one, you're going to be transferring the wine from the bottles into a tank, and then you're going to be filtering the yeast. So you transfer the wine from the bottle to a tank, and then you're filtering all the yeast at once under pressure and rebottling the wine into a different bottle. So this small distinction is very important. Wines from the bottle are transferred into tanks and filtered from the yeast and rebottled. This is important to understand because on the bottle that are made by a transfer method, the term traditional method cannot be used. Instead of that, they're going to be using the term bottle fermented, which means that they use the transfer method instead of traditional method. Tank method. The purpose of the tank method is to have a wine that is dominated by fruits and flowers and primary aromas. So the secondary aromas of yeast that traditional method sparkling wines are known for is not the purpose of tank method. For tank method, the most famous wine made by a tank method is Prosecco, and we'll be discussing that in a separate video. But usually tank method sparkling wines are used for grapes that are aromatic grape varieties like Muscat, Riesling, and Glera. This is a much cheaper and faster and less labor intensive way to make a sparkling wine. High quality sparkling wines can also be produced by this method. These wines, they do not age in oak or ferment in oak, and there's no malolactic conversion in this wine. The tank method is called the tank method because the first and the second fermentations are in the tank. The tanks for sparkling, tanks for the tank method sparkling wines are much thicker because they need to withstand the pressure of the second fermentation in the tank. I'll explain that also in a separate video. And some tank method sparkling wines, they have paddles inside the tank in order to enhance, if the producer wants to have more texture from the lees inside the wine. So my point is, first fermentation in the tank, second fermentation in the tank, the wines are dominated by fruit and primary flavors. Ancestral method. So this is a very ancient method how to make sparkling wines. And this is a single fermentation that starts in a tank and finishes in the bottle. This one is a little bit more complex than tank, complex to explain. But again, this is a single fermentation that starts in a tank, like a first fermentation, but it's paused by chilling, and then the wine is transferred in the bottle where it finishes the fermentation. So this is partially fermented juice that is transferred from the tank into the bottle where the fermentation finishes or doesn't finish completely. You understand all the options here. May or may not be disgorged the yeast that is in the bottle. If it's disgorged, the wine is going to be clear. If it's not disgorged, the wine will be cloudy. Because it's a partially fermented juice, the CO2 pressure is lower, and these wines are considered semi-sparkling than tank or traditional method sparkling wines, and the wine on the end can be dry or with some levels of sweetness, or can be dominated by fruit, or if the lees stays in the bottle for a long time, can have more autolytic leesy character. Asti method. So Asti method has only one fermentation that is inside the tank. The point of this wine is to retain the flavors of the base wine, of the grape, the fruitiness, the floweriness. These are considered semi-sparkling wines. The most important one is Asti from the region of Piedmont. Again, I'll explain that in a second video. So the way that this method works, the juice is crushed and pressed and is separated on the side. It's chilled until it's ready to be processed through the process of fermentation. Then the juice is added to the tank. The fermentation starts. The CO2 is still not, the tank is not closed. The first initial CO2 is allowed to escape, and then at one point the tank is closed in order to retain the CO2. These wines usually ferment until 5 to 7% alcohol, so they still have a lot of sugar to be fermented, but this is initially stopped by chilling, stopping the fermentation, And as a result, you have a wine that is sweet because the fermentation did not finish, and have low percentage of alcohol and are very aromatic. Filtered and bottled under pressure, not to lose the CO2 and freshness. Carbonation method. Carbonation method is the cheapest method. So you have your base wine, you inject the CO2 in it, and you have your sparkling wine. Usually the wines that are made with this method are cheap wines that are dominated by primary flavors, and in many cases aromatic grape varieties are used, like Sauvignon Blanc. These are the 6 methods. Styles of sparkling wine. So there's sparkling wines with different levels of sweetness. On the final slide, I'll show you different levels of sweetness. That will be wines can be non-vintage or NV. These wines are usually the house style, the regular offer of the champagne house. Vintage champagnes means that the grapes are coming from a single vintage. In Champagne, because the climate is very challenging, Champagne vintage wines are only made in the best vintages. In other regions outside of Champagne, maybe vintage traditional sparkling wines are gonna be produced every year, but they're not gonna have the prestige as they do in Champagne. Color, rosé wines can be made by different methods. So it can either be grapes that are macerated on the skins in order to extract color. In Champagne, also blending white and red wine is allowed in order to make a rosé wine, or the color can be added on the end on the dosage step for Champagne. The wines can be Blanc de Blanc, which means that the wine is made white from white, that white wine is made only from white grapes, or Blanc de Noir, which means that the white traditional sparkling wine is made from black grapes, or Prestige de Cuvée. Prestige de Cuvée, it's the most prestigious wines, especially in Champagne, where the producers are blending their reserve wines in order to make the best possible wine. The levels of sweetness are highly regulated in the European Union. The only 3 ones that you actually need to remember the name and the sweetness levels is Brut Nature, Extra Brut, and Demi Sec. Brut Nature, the amount of sugar in the wine is from 0 to 3, but this sugar can only be from sugar that is not fermented, so no additional sugar can be added to the wine. Extra Brut is 0 to 6, where the additional sugar can be added on the dosage point. Brut 0 to 12. Extra Dry, where many Proseccos fit in, from 12 to 17. Sec 17 to 32. Demi-Sec 32 to 15. And Dux 50 grams and more. That's it, wine people. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it's helping. I'll see you in the next one. Stay thirsty and wise.